Welcome, everybody, back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, here on a Tuesday, January 28th, in this weird bye-week portion of the season where there's no football going on. Obviously, the Pro Bowl is next up before we get into the whole media week with the Super Bowl. But going back to the NFL, trying to find things to talk about, there was a good amount of things to actually find this week in relation to a whole, sort of just grouping of things around the NFL that have been going on. In terms of, we got things like Aaron Glenn at his introductory press conference talking about the quarterback situation as important as ever for Aaron Glenn and his new opportunity there. Then you got the NFL talking about replay assistant and potentially including quarterback slides and how they officiate that going forward as a topic of conversation. We're going to discuss some more on the Chiefs and how they keep getting to the Super Bowl, how it gets kind of old, but they keep getting there, is something else that we're going to discuss, as well as Michael Irvin and the Dallas Cowboys, and how Michael Irvin has pretty much said exactly what everyone's been thinking pretty publicly. So we're going to get into all of that on today's show. But before we get started, a quick reminder to you guys, if you guys have any questions, comments, or any opinions you'd like to share, to not hesitate to do so. Your input and insight always makes the show a lot better, and it gives us your perspective on anything that you're thinking of or anything that we haven't thought of as well. So it adds a lot to the conversation, and we always love it when you guys get involved. So to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that just by using the Super Chat feature. The Super Chat feature is able to get you guys involved with the show just by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air because I'm able to see it and I'll read it out loud and just get your guys' thoughts on anything that we're talking about on today's show. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as engaging as always. So that is there for you guys to use it whenever you guys would like. But we're going to start off by talking about the new era in New York. The first day of this new era, this Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey era, began yesterday on Monday with Ambassador Woody Johnson welcoming in his new head coach and his new general manager yesterday in front of the New York media. Everybody there intrigued and interested to see what, sort of the perspective and the mindset is for these two guys, right? In trying to reestablish what we thought was a great, project, a great situation to be in with the Jets, with an exciting young defense. Aaron Rodgers coming over as the final piece of the puzzle. You have a star in Garrett Wilson. Breece Hall look to have turned a corner. You improve the offensive line. Barring anything else that you might know on how the season went, if you had that all laid out in front of you, you would think that that's a pretty great situation. But things turned out for the worst, and this season completely capitulated on itself. So how do you not only get that spark back for this team, but how do you get it back for the fans also? And I think that's going to be a huge part of this for Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey. But at the press conference, one of the biggest talking points was obviously that quarterback position and really Aaron Rodgers and where things stand right now that they have a new voice, now that they have some new direction on where they want to go. Where does that leave Aaron, right? Because of the bad relationships potentially with Ambassador Woody Johnson and just the way the season ended, it definitely did not end on the easiest of terms, so to say. So knowing that, Aaron Glenn, I really appreciated and I really liked how he got in front of, the podium and everything like that to answer questions, but he kind of gave like a pre-statement on Aaron Rodgers, and I thought, what he said was very interesting. And he said, Aaron Rodgers will be talked about. It will be talked about. We've already texted that communication with Aaron Rodgers as we continue to look at the roster. We'll make decisions accordingly, and that's with a number of people on the team. So just before anybody can try and manipulate a question, try and get him to go down a certain path with a question or anything like that, and maybe forcing a non-answer or a wrong answer, that he might regret. He just came out in front of everybody and said, you know what, this is obviously what we're going to talk about. This is a huge decision, and he knows that. He accepted that, and he knows that they're already in the beginning portions of that. So to kind of give everybody a warning ahead, in advance, that this isn't something that they're going to shy away from. They're already out in front of it, and I thought that was a great way to start his press conference. And General Manager Darren Mougey also echoed the same feeling. He said that they're going to talk with Aaron soon, but that there's really no timeline on when that's going to happen. So not only what those two gentlemen said, but also Ambassador Woody Johnson also clarified that the decision to bring back Aaron Rodgers or not, from their standpoint, would be totally up to their new leadership group in Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey. And I thought that was not only a sigh of relief for me, but also I thought that was the mature answer to this situation, just because, if it was up to Ambassador Woody Johnson, I think we all pretty much know how that decision would go, that the Jets and Aaron would end up parting ways. But now when you have a new voice coming in that really has an outside view on everything and can have their own ability to gain their own information and things like that on the team and then act accordingly, I think that's the best way to go about it. And Aaron Glenn could still say no, that he doesn't want Aaron Rodgers back after I'm sure they have those conversations, but at least it's coming from a pretty unbiased point of view that's coming in trying to do the best job for the team, really not with anything else in mind. So I thought that was a good turn in the right direction for this organization. And, now talking about this whole scenario with both Aarons, Aaron Glenn and Aaron Rodgers, right? Is this even a situation where, can give an answer to right now in terms of, well, the season didn't go great and Aaron was a big part of that, so no, I don't want Aaron Rodgers back. But when you really take in all the information and things like that, when you look at free agency, look at the draft, maybe some of the quarterbacks you have, like a Jordan Travis or something like that, is it really the best option to just say, you know what, forget about Rodgers, I'm done with him, he didn't do anything, let's just move on? When you kind of reel it back in, you realize, at least in my opinion, that I think Aaron, for me, if I was Aaron Glenn, I would want Aaron Rodgers to stick around because he had a pretty decent season all in all, based on the numbers and the way that he, put up some pretty impressive performances, even if the wins and losses weren't quite there in favor of them. But I think, again, when you look at free agency, you look at a Sam Darnold, a Justin Fields potentially out there, Russell Wilson, and, guys like, I don't know, I guess like Daniel Jones is another one. It doesn't really give me much more confidence that they're going to come in and change this entire situation around. And they could potentially, maybe only Sam Darnold actually, be a little bit more expensive. So I think it's not going to be this Super Bowl aspiring team, in all honesty, talking in January, but you can only hope that it is going to get better. And I think having a familiarity there, a continuation of Aaron, and, that also brings in Davante Adams and also what they do with him. But really just sticking with Aaron because of the quarterback position and how much importance there is on that. I think just having him there for one more year and then really assessing everything else would really work in their favor. And then after this year, after you kind of get your first, taste of what it is like being the Jets head coach and making these decisions, then I think you could approach next year's, potential quarterback draft class with a lot more intent and a lot more focus on one position. Whereas this offseason, you can work on improving the offensive line more, figuring out how to get the best out of Braylon Allen and Breece Hall, making sure Garrett Wilson is taken care of and feels like he's important to this offense, and also, just figuring out what you want this team to look for, establishing that culture, because not everybody can be the Washington Commanders, unfortunately. So they got a lot of talent in New York, but I feel like the problems lie a little bit deeper than, some may estimate that, these problems are. So overall, I mean, it's only the beginning remarks on this whole situation. There were some reports that said that Aaron would also, give his side and how he's feeling in terms of wanting to play again or maybe, retiring or something like that by the start of free agency. So that's in a little bit over a month, at the start of March. So this whole period, it's going to be a lot of hearsay and sources and reporting and things like that. But, we're not really going to have a clearer picture of what's going on until, I'm assuming, mid to late February at the earliest. So overall, in terms of just Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey, I was pleasantly surprised with, or not surprised, but just very glad to see how, I think, direct and just very cold cut they were. In New York, I think you kind of need to have that sort of attitude, especially as the head coach of an organization like the Jets. So it seems like Aaron Glenn, being a former player there, obviously knows what he's in for. So at least that gives me a little bit more reassurance on the whole thing, including a decision like this. But speaking about decisions, the Cowboys made a decision with their head coach over the weekend, and it didn't leave Michael Irvin particularly happy. The Hall of Fame wide receiver, very involved with the Cowboys, very vocal about the Cowboys, was not very happy, like I said before, with their decision to hire Brian Schottenheimer. And he went off on a big tangent over the weekend on his YouTube channel that I thought was interesting, and some of the remarks he was saying was reflective on what I think a lot of people are saying around Dallas. So we're going to go into what he said coming up after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We're back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, and if you are just joining the show right now, we previously talked about Aaron Glenn and his introductory press conference with the New York Jets yesterday, but now moving on to our new segment here, we have to talk a little bit more about the Dallas Cowboys, and not really on anything regarding them directly, but with Michael Irvin, a guy that's very involved with the Dallas Cowboys, a guy that's very vocal about it, very passionate, to say the least, about his Dallas Cowboys. And he was there for some of their more prosperous years. So you would understand that point. And I know Cowboys fans get pretty down about this team, especially recently. But Michael Irvin really always seems to be the most loyal, the most optimistic fan. Delusional optimism could be something that could be described as what Michael Irvin acts like with this team. But I have really never seen him kind of like this. And it was a story, a report that really intrigued me because I thought when I looked at it, all right, how bad could this be, right? Because I know what Irvin has said before about the Cowboys, and he always remains with a pretty optimistic view on it, as he usually does. But it felt like it really boiled over on Saturday when they announced, Brian Schottenheimer as the new head coach, and, he had his press conference yesterday, but it was Saturday when Irvin went on his YouTube channel and just really let everybody know how he was truly feeling about this new head coach for the Dallas Cowboys. And I have actually some of the things that he said on here. After we remove Aaron Glenn, we can go over to Michael Irvin. And this is some of the things that Michael Irvin said on the coaching hire for the Cowboys. The first thing he said was, "Here's my issue. we lost an opportunity here. I don't know what will happen with Coach Schottenheimer and the Dallas Cowboys, but Jerry's a shrewd businessman. And this opportunity, I'm shocked he did not see. And you initially think that he's talking about, the opportunity of hiring a guy like Deion Sanders and really being in this point where you could bring in someone to really shake things up. And that's where my mindset initially was when I saw that Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys were going to part ways, right? I just felt like it was time, like it was too much of the same thing. They would have been fine bringing back the exact same group of personnel that got him to a 7-10 record, and they were going to be okay with that. So I just felt like it was time anyway just for them to just go their separate ways. It was going to be more of the same thing, like, is this season more Mike McCarthy or Jerry Jones for how potentially bad it's going? Or should they have brought in a new head coach? Would Deion have been more successful with this team? You could already see the headlines right next season if they would have kept McCarthy. So I thought they move on from him. Yeah, bringing in Kellen Moore is not too far away from what you're used to, but at least it's something else with bringing in a guy from Philadelphia, in his time there this year. You make them worse as well by taking away their offensive coordinator. So I thought they were going to go down that route. But unfortunately, and I'm speaking from my personal feelings, they just played it safe and went with Brian Schottenheimer. And Michael Irvin makes a good point. You don't really know what, this whole thing could be. I think everyone's being, including myself, pretty judgmental and just pretty harsh on Brian Schottenheimer, like he's some bum that doesn't deserve a head coaching opportunity. He's been very heavily involved in coaching and being an assistant coach and everything like that. So no one's really doubting his ability or anything like that. I just think for the context of the situation that the Eagles should have the Cowboys should have pivoted in a different direction, right? With the amount of attention they get and the problems that have been haunting them for the last 30 years now, right? It felt like they needed some sort of wake-up call, and it seems like Michael Irvin was saying the same thing. But that's not all he said. He said the next statement, which even rings a little bit more serious and a little bit more true, when he was talking about the NFC East and the NFC Championship, obviously having the Eagles and the Commanders in it, right? The Commanders making it back to a conference championship game before the Dallas Cowboys. And Michael Irvin said, "We have two NFC East teams in the NFC Championship game being played. All eyes on them. The Philadelphia Eagles and the Washington Commanders. Our enemies on all fronts, and they're in a position that we haven't held in 30, years." So pretty upset about it. And, he went on to say a bit more that I just kind of summarized here with these bullet points. He also said that he pointed out that they might start losing fans because nothing has changed over the last 30 years. They needed someone to come in and shake things up, like I said before. Also, he mentioned how in this time where the Cowboys really just have been, I guess, kind of irrelevant to an extent in terms of producing on the field, there's been the Chiefs dynasty, the Patriots dynasty, and a lot of people, in his words, said that could look at that dynasty and could look at that domination from the Chiefs and think, maybe this is America's team, right? And he was talking about, I think, just kind of in a hyperbole sort of sense, how, that they were going to lose the America's team sort of moniker, right, if they kept performing like this. And I thought that part was pretty funny. But, he also mentioned how he still wants Deion to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, but really he extended on that point and said that he would have preferred that they brought in someone with some previous head coaching experience. And he mentioned Pete Carroll going over to Las Vegas, and I'm sure he would have been happy with Pete Carroll, although he didn't say that. It felt like, he was kind of, inclining that, right, with mentioning Pete Carroll there. And Brian Schottenheimer obviously has never really been a head coach. He has really just been as an assistant coach all throughout his career. So this is his first opportunity, and again, you don't want to just shoot him down before giving him a fair chance at it. But it just feels like this context, this scenario with the Cowboys was just a little bit bigger for for someone to just have their first head coaching opportunity, right? Like, all honesty, like, for anybody to have their first head coaching opportunity, I don't think it would have been very beneficial in Dallas at all, to be frank, right? Because whether it been, Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn, Brian Schottenheimer now, I don't think any of them would have really excelled as a first-time head coach in Dallas for obvious reasons that everyone's already said before, like the fact that Jerry is and has the final say on everything, that he's constantly, looking over your shoulder, and everybody knows that, he's the one that kind of runs everything around there. Not that head coaches elsewhere have maximum power over everything that goes on in the organization, but they have a lot of power in terms of, personnel, roster decisions, and, the whole thing in terms of, a level just below the owner and things like that, right? Some head coaches in certain places have that sort of leverage, and in Dallas, they have even less than what the average is around the entire NFL, right? Because everything just runs through Jerry Jones, and he would just like to have everything his way. So in this scenario, I don't think being a first-time head coach would have been very beneficial in Dallas, right? And I guess Michael Irvin was also saying that when he mentioned, having an experienced head coach, but I don't think that would have gone over well with a guy like Jerry Jones, unless, of course, he's had previous relationships with them as a former coach. They just brought back Matt Eberflus, right? And he was a linebacker coach there, and he was the passing game coordinator there as well, like almost 10 years ago. So that's a guy that, fits the criteria of being hired by the Cowboys, right? Having that familiarity. Jerry thinks you're good to come in. He knows you. You can come in and you're invited to the party, right? That's the sort of situation that they're running in Dallas. And again, now you start thinking, you kind of get into this spot where, all right, well, the head coach isn't necessarily who we wanted to. And then I started thinking, like, would any head coach, come in and would have fixed this team automatically? And I mean, I don't know. I highly doubt it. And I think that's also the ironic part about it. And honestly, what kind of fits and sides with Jerry Jones is that he could have hired anybody, right? And if he would have brought in Dion, I don't think this roster would have been that much better off just with a different coach to compete with, say, the Eagles or the Commanders or the Lions and teams like that. I think this roster still has a lot of holes that need to be plugged, and with whoever was coaching them, I thought it was still going to be an extremely tough thing to just kind of turn around from one year to the next. Although, Michael Parsons said that they were, just very close. He felt that this team was very close. It definitely doesn't look like that, especially because it feels like I'm living the exact same thing that I was living a year ago, right? When Jerry Jones said that this team was going to be all in and they were returning the exact same team, if not worse, after losing a bunch of guys. It feels like I'm just rewatching that same exact movie now in 2025. And it just feels like, again, that they're running in circles because they're very uncomfortable. Or I guess I should say Jerry is very uncomfortable with change, right? Change and the shifting of power balance is not something that he's particularly interested in. So we find ourselves here, right, with Michael Irvin going off on his YouTube channel, and I'm sure a lot of Dallas Cowboys fans sharing that same sentiment. And it is a pretty dire situation, I guess, because, the roster might need a lot of help, and the head coach isn't the guy that you thought should be coming in. But, a lot of the times, the Cowboys surprise us with things that they say, they do, that really we can't really explain, all in all, to be fair. But maybe now in situations like this where it seems like they're making all the right choices, maybe it works the opposite way. And maybe something will stick to the wall, right? For as many times as they've tried, something has to eventually stick, you'd hope for this team, for this franchise, and for those poor fans out there as well. But it's still a long process. We're still in the early portion of it, so we'll see where this goes from here. But where the show is going is into another quick break. But when we return, we're going to talk about last week, not this past weekend, the weekend before that, the divisional round where particularly the Texans played the Kansas City Chiefs, and there was that controversial slide by Patrick Mahomes that drew a lot of debate on unnecessary roughness calls on quarterbacks and things like that. So we're going to talk about replay assistant that has been integrated into the NFL much more this year, and potentially including quarterback slides in as potential reviews for the upcoming season. When we return, we're going to talk about that and give our thoughts on it, and also give some suggestions on some rule changes when it comes to quarterback slides. So all of that is coming up right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
So we are back here on the show now, and it's been about 10 days since the Kansas City Chiefs played Houston in the divisional round. Their first game of the playoffs, the Texans getting to that spot after they defeated the Los Angeles Chargers at home. And, you might be asking why I'm bringing this up now, because it's so far after the fact. But one of the biggest takeaways from that game was when, in the third quarter of that game, when Patrick ran for a few yards, right, he escaped some pressure and started running and trying to get those extra yards, right, and he eventually dropped down and, slid down pretty late, and it looked like he simply just fell to the ground rather than actually sliding, and he drew contact from, I forget who the defenders were, but he drew contact from two defenders, and it was called for an unnecessary roughness. And during the game, if you were watching, you heard Troy Aikman really be upset about it and how it was unfair on the defenders, and how, that it puts the defenders in a bad spot eventually, where they don't know when or whether Patrick's going to slide or go out of bounds and things like that. So they're caught in between a hard spot and a rough place, and they just got to do something. And it always feels like they end up with the short end of the stick. So Aikman, on the broadcast on Saturday on ESPN, he wasn't a big fan of the unnecessary roughness calls. And afterwards, a lot of people watching the game also weren't happy with it as well. And it led to a lot of debate with, a lot of people saying that the Chiefs get all the favorable calls, that the refs are always on their side, and, the top quarterbacks always end up benefiting from plays like that. The tie always goes to the quarterback. Any sort of hesitation or doubt, you'd have to go and prioritize the safety and health of the multi-million, faces of the NFL. So while that is a reality, and after so much talk about it everywhere, quite honestly, ESPN reported that over this past weekend that the NFL is expected to expand replay assist this offseason for plays that now would include the quarterback slide. And replay assist, if you have no idea what that is basically remote officials helping with calls made on the field and basically reviewing plays like the spot of the ball, whether a pass was incomplete or not. If the on-field officials can't really see it, replay assist is there to help out with that, or intentional grounding calls, late hits out of bounds, high hits on quarterbacks, and really replay assist is there to correct any on the field calls that the on the field officials might have missed or called incorrectly, because they don't always have a good vantage point on these plays. It's always so quick and fast, and there's a lot of people everywhere, so they don't always make the right calls, which is fair. You have the human aspect of it. So replay assist is there to just provide, sort of that safety blanket, right? If they do mess up a call, they're there to kind of tell them, like, yo, like, this is not how you called it. You might want to take another look at it, or we'll take another look at it, and it's actually this instead of that, what you called. So I thought it's a pretty good integration to the league so far this year. I thought it's been pretty clean for the most part, and now they're going to potentially explore in the offseason the potential of having quarterback slides being something that replay assist can look at after the fact and say, you know what, like, the quarterback did get hit late there, or you know what, he actually didn't get hit that hard, take away the flag, or maybe you want to throw a flag there or something like that, right? That's where I feel like this is leading to, and not only potentially adding them in, but also changing how they're identified on late hits to sliding quarterbacks. And NFL officiating and rules analyst Walt Anderson said that because Patrick's helmet on that play moved a little bit, right? There was a little bit of contact, I think, with maybe the arm or the hand of one of the defenders. Walt Anderson said that because that contact forced Patrick's helmet to move a little bit, it warranted that flag being thrown and meeting the criteria for unnecessary roughness. So, according to these reports, that could also be something that could end up being changed, right? How these officials call the rules and really lay out the criteria. Because, in all honesty, if it's just based on the contact and the movement of Patrick's helmet, then you can call a lot of things as unnecessary roughness, right? And that seems like it's leaning too far in favor of the offense. So hopefully they not only change replay assist to include quarterback slides, but also taking another look at the rules and seeing how they're called as well. So for me, overall, I think replay assist should be used. I think it should be used on all plays, honestly, like some holding calls, some defensive calls as well. I'm trying to think, just like illegal formations is another one that always gets it, and false starts, I think, could be another one, depending on how quick and how often you throw the flag out there, right? Because you can't do it all the time, and false starts is a tricky one to kind of make a call like that, but illegal blocks or illegal, some sort of play like that where you can review it, and if it's a big call, like a holding call down the field on a defensive back or offensive pass interference, things like that, I feel like replay assist should really just always be there to review the play anyway, as just like a second-hand evaluation of a play and see if everything, kind of pairs up. And if it doesn't, yeah, it might drag the game on a little bit longer because you could start nitpicking, but I think to ensure the game goes as fairly as possible, I think that would be something that I would be in favor of if they were to change that. But also, the downside of that could also be the subjectivity that comes along with it, because one of the remote officials could see it differently than another, and both of them could see it differently than somebody at home. It's never going to satisfy everybody, but I think it's just more of a fact that you want to at least show that you're giving the effort and the action to try and correct it, rather than it not being in the rules and you're just like, oh well, like, we can't review it. And you don't want to have a situation where you clearly should review it and it should be included in replay assist, but because it's not, you just kind of leave it. That's always the worst, situations, right? Like, I think like a couple years ago where defensive pass interference couldn't be reviewed, or it could be reviewed or something like that, and there was a play that was supposed to be pass interference, but because they can't review it or anything like that, like the other team is just sort of beat. They can't do anything. It's not in the rules, so they just gotta live with it. Even though it's pretty obvious that it is this foul or this other foul, they can't do anything about it. And I think that's what you want to try to avoid at all costs. And in regards to Patrick's slide, I think he even said after the game where they asked him about it that he said that he probably shouldn't have done that, right? Kind of baiting the defender and then just kind of dropping down to make it look like he's sliding. But I thought it was a pretty bad call. You could see that they really hit each other more, the two defenders. They hit into each other more than they actually hit Patrick. So it felt a little bit overblown. It felt just like the ref just kind of threw it to at least have it out there rather than not throwing it at all. And if it ends up being worse, then you kind of look pretty bad because you didn't throw the flag, right? I think a lot of them are just quickly drawn to it because they don't want to be looked upon as the ref that didn't throw that flag and protected the quarterback, right? So it's always in that favor, but I can't help but think that with all these, changes I'm suggesting and how replay assist should always be there, you can't help but think that it just is going to add more drama and more division among, opinions and calls and refs and the fans on social media and things like that. But I think the main thing is changing it in how these calls are officiated, right? Not just so much that we just need to have more replay assists, but I think my main point is just changing how these rules are officiated a little bit, because a flag for just seeing his helmet move and seeing some sort of remote contact to his helmet is a little bit overblown, is a little bit crazy in my opinion. So what I'd like to see change in regards to the rules here a little bit is with replay assist, having it for all calls or most calls except offensive line and defensive line holding calls, because you could start nitpicking those. So I'm not going to include those in here, but when it comes to quarterback slides and how they change the officiating around that, I would like to see a flag on a sliding quarterback only when he clearly goes to slide and when the defender also doesn't show any signs of slowing down, right? If the quarterback abides by all the rules and directly goes to slide and the defender, doesn't really hold up or, kind of brace himself, then you could throw the flag, right? Because then you kind of see that the defender is not on the same, level as the quarterback. Because the quarterback's giving himself up and the defender is still, running at him, then you could throw a flag in that scenario. But where I kind of go away from that is this other rule, or this other way of officiating a quarterback slide, is if a quarterback, sort of doesn't directly go down, but rather, tries to kind of shimmy his way, try to throw in there a juke or a spin move or gain some extra yards and kind of make a football move, as a lot of refs say during the games, right? He made a football move, so they count it as a fumble or as a reception or something like that, right? If you see that the quarterback clearly makes a football move rather than just easily sliding and going down, then I think you have to consider him a runner and not really a quarterback, right? So if he is going to be considered a runner like I want him to be, then the defenders can go and hit him a little bit, like a running back, right? Not just a quarterback and protecting and easing up on him, because at that point, if he's trying to shimmy, if he's trying to gain extra yards, if he's trying to juke one of these defenders, or worst case scenario, run right through them where they kind of let their guard down, then you're not really protecting the defender in that scenario, right? You're going too much in favor of the quarterback. And I feel like if they clearly make a football move like that, then they become a runner in that scenario. And, sliding late, just dropping down isn't going to protect you like it would if you were a quarterback. And I think doing that, you'll kind of start to filter out some of the indecisiveness where quarterbacks try and manipulate the rules in their favor, which I have no problem with. Trying to extend the limit of the rules in your favor. that's not really on them. I have no problem with that. They're just doing whatever it takes to win, and it's more on the NFL to kind of fix that if they don't want to see that happen. So if replay assist actually, does start to include quarterback slides, it will be something that I'm sure is going to bring up a lot more discussion, for sure, if anything, next season when replay assist deems that it is an unnecessary roughness call or it's not an unnecessary roughness call, and all the other millions of scenarios that we can have with that. But it took a moment like that for them to make a decision like this, potentially. So they're going to talk about it at the owners' meetings and things like that over the summer. But for right now, it is still in its infant state. So we're going to leave it at that and move on to our last couple segments here, talking about the Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills. Firstly, focusing on the Bills, we're going to discuss where and what they could do going forward after suffering another tough loss like they did. Where can they go and where can they look to try and improve to hopefully, a year from now, be a lot happier potentially and be on their way to a Super Bowl? Where could they improve? We're going to answer those questions coming up next.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We are back here on the show now, and like I mentioned before the break, we are discussing more on the Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills because we just couldn't leave it to the game and reviewing the game and everything that happened. But the aftermath, I think, does hold some value just because, this game was the game everybody wanted to see, right? It was the game of history, legacies being defined, history continuing with the Chiefs still looking to three-peat, whether or not the Bills were going to stop them and get back to a Super Bowl and things like that, and kind of try and forget about the 4 straight Super Bowls that they lost in the 90s and things like that. For Josh Allen, could he join that very, very short list of quarterbacks that have beaten Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs? It still only remains at Tom Brady and Joe Burrow. But because none of that actually happened and the Chiefs are going back to the Super Bowl, I wanted to focus on the Bills here a little bit because, Josh Allen is now 0-4 against Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, and just saying that, him being the only quarterback to be 0-4 against another quarterback in playoff history is just brutal, and especially on Josh because I think for a lot of people, whether it's Lamar or Josh, it's always Lamar or Josh, right? It's always one of those two guys vying for that spot to be the closest one to dethrone Patrick, right? They always feel like they're the picture as much because his team just isn't as good as the Bills or the Ravens. So it always feels like it's Josh or Lamar, and Josh has had a couple of good cracks at it, and he's come the closest without actually beating him. And that he's a great quarterback. He has all the tools, and the maturity that we've seen from him has been tremendous to see at where he's at now to where he was in his first and second year. You probably would have never thought it was the same quarterback, but truly, it still hasn't been enough to get over that mountain. And since 2018, the Bills have 77 regular season wins, which is the third most only to the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens. And in that time, they're 7-6 in the playoffs, with 4 of those losses obviously coming to the Chiefs. And when you combine both of those, the 84 wins that the Buffalo Bills have in that time since 2018 are the most by any team that hasn't made it to a Super Bowl yet in NFL history. And it's insane when you kind of put it like that. And there's a bunch of other stats to kind of put this into perspective. But after a failed tush push, after a drop pass on fourth down, is it now a scenario where we could start talking about whether the Bills, not that their playoff window is closed or that their championship window is closed, but I can't help but put myself in a situation where I'm thinking like they've had 4 cracks at it now to beat Patrick, and they've lost another AFC championship game. How realistic is it to kind of start talking about, are they closer to not making it back to this point, or are they closer to still being in contention for the Super Bowl, right? Because when you look at the AFC, to say that the Bills are just going to continue to have their shot at the Kansas City Chiefs, I think is very unrealistic, because obviously you have the Ravens, who probably felt that they should have beat the Bills in the first place, or you have the Bengals, who I expect to be a lot better because of their quarterback. The Chargers aren't going anywhere. The Texans aren't going anywhere because they are winning that division. The Steelers, for as frustrating as they are always going to be in the mix. So while they might be looked upon as a class below, it's still very competitive to get in. And I mean, the Jets, the Dolphins, and the Patriots aren't going to challenge the Bills anytime soon, it doesn't look like. But to say that in the playoffs, it's just always going to be the Bills against the Chiefs each and every year. Dan Campbell said it best, and everyone's used this line since the Bills have lost. But he said it after they got to the NFC Championship game last year against the 49ers, and how they were in a great spot to win that game, but they ended up giving it up. How that could have been their only time that himself or this group ever makes it back, because you truly never know. So I start to have more doubt creep into my head about the Bills, right? I know they're great, they're talented. Sean McDermott definitely should not be looked upon as being fired or anything like that. They don't have to strip this whole thing down, right? Because they lost again. But there is that little bit of doubt, like how confident are we that they're just going to keep getting back here, right? Or was that their best chance? And can they even improve, or can they even move on from it, right? And I feel like a lot of people aren't giving it enough severity when it comes to losing another game like this, because Josh is, again, the only quarterback that this has ever happened to. The Bills lost 4 straight Super Bowls in the 90s, and now that they've had their best team since then, the odds on this happening to the Bills now, after, I can't even imagine, being a fan of the Bills during that time where my team loses 4 straight Super Bowls, to now have your best team since that time to potentially get back to the Super Bowl, but you run into this once in a generation, once in a century player in Patrick Mahomes, who could very well be the best player ever, and now he's always standing in the way of you, seems like a little bit just unfair and almost too much on the Buffalo Bills. But to not over exaggerate here, and to kind of reel it back into the Bills and already looking ahead to next year, I would say that some places where we could see them improve, or where we could see them at least take a little tiny step forward, and where they could look to try and right this situation, you could say in areas like wide receiver or defensive back. And I think those 2 spots were pretty evident and pretty clear that it just needs a little bit of tweaking, or it just needs a little bit more attention going into this year. Because on one hand, I don't like saying that they need a number one reliable, bona fide $30+ million wide receiver, because they just had one in Stephon Diggs. And I wasn't a big fan of that, and I thought that the Bills were going to go down and plummet after they let him go, and they did a very good job of changing their identity and changing what this team was about on offense. So I don't like saying now that they need a Stephon Diggs back, because they already had him, and it still wasn't enough to beat the Chiefs, right? So I don't like saying that, but I still think that in that sort of realm, I just need more from some of these guys, right? And I'm not well, I'm not going to say I'm not, but Dalton Kincaid, for him to drop that pass, I felt he should have caught it. But not only just that pass, but I feel like when you have a guy like him, they took him in the first round. I feel like you need some more production from him. Dawson Knox really wasn't involved too much. And then you look at the wide receivers. Khalil Shakir continues to be their most reliable guy. And you thought you were actually getting one of those number one guys in Amari Cooper, but his performance and his form was very sporadic. And again, the Bills love to run the ball, and they're a very run-heavy team. So that's just who they are, and there's no problem with that. But I feel like whether it be their offense or Josh not really getting the ball to them as much, but I just feel like wide receiver needs some more production out of that group. And whether it was a fact that it was just too early for guys like Keon Coleman and, to some respect, Dalton Kincaid, because he's only in his second year, that could be fair. But in these games, you need some of those wow moments and some of those players and guys that can go out there and no matter what, the coverage, the scenario, the quarter, anything like that they can go out and give you one of those magical plays. And Khalil Shakir is good. He's very good. But I'm not so sure that they trust him quite like that. So, that is one area where I thought they could get more, production from and see some sort of improvement. But the bigger one was defensive back. And I think this one was very obvious when Christian Benford went down, and he went down with a head injury, which was scary. But then you saw Kaiir Elam come in for Christian Benford, and Kaiir Elam was a former first-round pick as well for the Bills. And as soon as he came in, it was pretty clear that he was playing very safe, like very conservative, right? Every time it was either man coverage or zone, he was very like 7 to 5 yards away from the wide receiver, and he was just playing very conservative, trying to keep everything in front of him. But when you're that far, right, when you're not really affecting the wide receiver that much, you're giving a guy like Patrick, the worst guy you want to give it to, some sort of cushion and advantage there, right? And they kept going after him, play after play after play. You always saw number 5 for the Buffalo Bills in coverage there for some point in the kind of like the middle portion of the game. So really throughout the entire season, I do understand the point where like this team, we've mentioned it before, is a very zone favorable team. They'd rather run zone and keep everything in front of them and control the pace of the game. So all these opportunities that you might get on defense, you got to be methodical, you got to be pinpoint accurate and everything like that to beat this zone, because they're not going to beat themselves. They're going to stand back there and keep everything in front of them and force you to make a mistake, right? But when you're playing against Patrick, like, he'll just pick apart that zone. He'll go up and down the field on it, and he's methodical anyway this year, right? That is a clear characteristic of the Chiefs this year anyway. So the zone was never going to work. Being conservative and things like that was not going to work against Patrick. So they were forced to play man coverage, and it was something that you could clearly see they weren't very comfortable with, and it wasn't very much them for whether it be the scheme or they're just not comfortable with it. It just felt like they were out of their element in that regard, in that, portion of the game. So I think improving at defensive back and, just as a simple comparison, getting a guy like Tre'Davious White and what he was able to do for you, I think that would go a long way in just bringing more guys to other areas of the field, if anything, right? If you have a great corner on one side, you can kind of leave him off to his own, and you could still trust him to get the job done, like the Chiefs do very much with Trent McDuffie. It allows them to do a lot more with their defense because they have so much trust in Trent McDuffie. That's why they let L'Jarius Sneed go, right? That was a big talking point in the offseason, but they felt they had another number one guy there, and look at them now, right? They're back in the Super Bowl. So I think doing things like that and improving, these minor details, right? I'm not saying that all their defensive backs are trash or all their wide receivers are really bad. They just got to get a little bit better, just kind of fine-tune it and really try and whittle out any sort of doubt that you might have with these positions. Because I think everywhere else, they're pretty strong, quite honestly. So when it comes to the Chiefs and these big games, it's all those fine margins, and you're only as strong as your weakest point. And I think their weakest points ended up letting them down on Sunday, whereas the Chiefs, weakest points, right, they all ended up making plays. So that's where I kind of see it going for the Buffalo Bills. Still very, very early before we really consider anything in terms of making changes. But yeah, not a lot to say about the Bills, right? Still very brutal, very tough loss for them. But we will get to our final segment now of the show, and we're going to go to the other side of things, the happier side of things in Kansas City, and just basically identify 3 things that have really made this team this year, this specific team this year, so successful. What do they do better than all the other teams in the AFC to represent the conference once again? We're going to get to that when we return after this. Thank you for joining me back here on the final segment of today's show. And like we mentioned in the previous segment, if you were able to join me for that segment, we talked about the Buffalo Bills and areas where they can improve upon to not only get back to, facing off against the Chiefs potentially next year, but like finally beating them, finally getting past them and getting over this curse that's over them, honestly. But on the other side of things, the Chiefs, we're back here again a year later talking about the same team being in the same position, about to make even more history on the individual sort of thing, on the small scale sort of, aspect of it, but also in a macro view of it, right? They're the only team that has won back-to-back Super Bowls and now has made it back to the Super Bowl, back to the big game, right? All the other teams that have won back-to-back Super Bowls all lost in the conference championship. So the Chiefs already made history by getting to this point, but they want to finish their story and, stand alone in a different stratosphere in terms of elite level of dynasties and greatness if they're able to pull this off. But other than the fact that the Chiefs just appear as inevitable at this point in the AFC, at least, when you have Patrick, you have Andy Reid as your head coach, and their reputation as a dynasty, right? Because a lot of the times when you're just talking about a Patriots dynasty, a Chiefs dynasty, the fact that they build that reputation and that legacy is usually enough to just beat all these other teams, right? You just look at them and think, oh, it's the Patriots, right? They've won, they're known for this. That's usually enough to get them over the hump. So the Chiefs already have that going for them, right? Those are all their starting points at the beginning of this year and where we are right now. But I think there's 3 things that this year have really stood out to me when it comes to this team and how they're playing great football again, but how it just looks a little bit differently than it's done in years past. And one of the first things that I noticed about this team as one of these main factors, to kind of how they got back to the Super Bowl, was their ability to have all these weapons just be interchangeable, just be easily, brought in, brought out. I have a certain guy for a certain position, a certain play, he can fill it. But if not, I also have the ability to bring another guy in here. If he is out, all right, well, we have another guy that's able to do that exact same thing, fit into this offense, and also do their own little thing that kind of distinguishes them, but also mainly everybody is able to fill their role, whatever that role may be, right? It could be different. It could be the same as what Juju's doing, as the same as Xavier Worthy, right? But they're all able to fit into this offense very well and just be interchangeable parts to a well-oiled machine. And you can't really say the same for a lot of teams. Like when George Pickens doesn't play for the Steelers, that offense is probably not scoring more than 13 points. The Lions, with all their injuries and all their players going down on defense, that they're going to have to score a lot of points, right? Because that defense might not be able to stop a lot of these great teams. And then in Houston, once Stephon Diggs goes down, and especially when Nico Collins went down, I should say first, they looked a little bit off. Like it looked like everything was just a step slow, or the communication wasn't there. And, those are only a couple examples, but it doesn't happen really with the Chiefs, right? Because you look at this team losing their starting running back in Isaiah Pacheco. You look at this team losing their number one wide receiver in Rashee Rice, losing Hollywood Brown before he even plays a snap for them in the regular season, and their left tackle position was not very good at all this year. But even still, you lose Pacheco, all right, we're going to bring in Kareem Hunt, and it looks like they didn't lose a step at all. They actually run the ball more this year than they ever did, and their starting running back at the beginning of the year was out, and they brought in this other guy, and they looked just as fine without him as they did with him. Then you look at their rookie wide receiver, Xavier Worthy, and stepping up in some big moments, getting more and more accustomed to this offense and having a bigger role because they need him to, right? If Rashee Rice was playing, maybe Xavier Worthy wouldn't be doing so much. But now that he has to step into that role, they were able to just, all right, Rashee Rice, you sit on the bench, you recover for as long as you need to. Xavier Worthy can just come in and do a very good job at what Rashee Rice was also doing. And, you look at Juju coming in, also having a role on this team, just out of nowhere, here or there, he'll do something and just contribute to a win. They also brought in DeAndre Hopkins, that maybe isn't as dominant as he once was, but he's able to, again, fit what this offense needs to do. All these pieces are rotatable. They're able to just be interchanged within each other, and it adds a lot to this team. And you look at even Joe Thuney, another one where he's the starting left guard, but because the left tackle position's really bad, they'll just kick him out there, and now this offensive line looks, for the most part, like their starting unit, right? Like there's no problem with this team. So even when you have games like the Buffalo game this past Sunday, where Travis Kelce really didn't have a monster game, it's always able to be somebody else. Somebody else is always able to step up, right? They're all, again, interchangeable. So that was one thing that I thought was very distinguishable from the Chiefs this year. Then you look at the main man, Patrick Mahomes, right? And his development, along with the development of this offense, I think, because mostly he is this offense, right? He is how this offense moves and executes and essentially runs, right? But I think the change that we've seen this year is a massive sign of maturity when a coach isn't attached to a play style or a certain scheme or just how they want to operate their offense. I think a lot of times coaches are too bogged down with just doing it this way, and the Chiefs have shown that their ability to develop, to evolve from what they once were to what they are now has, again, shown a different level when it comes to them and everybody in the AFC. And in Kansas City, going from a young quarterback in Patrick, scoring 30-plus points per game, throwing like 60-yard bombs to Tyreek Hill, and Now he's a lot more mature and he's a lot more calculated. All the drives are methodical. They're long drives. They're sustainable. They're consistent and things like that, right? It's not just a flash in a pan sort of moment like it maybe once was. The games are a lot more low scoring, but the control and the pulse that they keep the games at is a lot more slower, and they're running it at the pace that they want to run it at. And a lot of teams can't really mess with that, right? And that's what I think the Chiefs do very well. And they have the most 10-plus play drives this year. And Patrick, you think about it, Patrick's not even in the Pro Bowl. He wasn't named to the All-Pro. He's not in any MVP conversations or anything like that because his numbers are really, they're also down this year, I should say. And he just scored, or the Chiefs just had their first 30-plus point game this past Sunday against the Buffalo Bills. And it doesn't even matter because they have now evolved to be this team that can score 23 points, but that's all they really need. If they win 23-22, 23-14, it's all the same to them. They don't really matter. They're past having to score 30-plus points a game. Now everything is a lot more of a higher quality than it is maybe an increased quantity in that respect. So I think that evolution of this offense and Patrick has been massive for them. Not to say that he can't, throw, these bombs still and, that they can't just click it and have 30 plus points. It was pretty clear against the Bills, but they just don't need to, and they're perfectly fine with that. So that maturity is huge for them. And then just simply Steve Spagnuolo and this defense is a huge portion of this team, and it's something that I think they've really leaned into this year. And you see Chris Jones and Travis Kelce both giving Spags a lot of credit, much like he deserves. But again, it's not necessary for them to score 15, to allow, only 15 points per game, like maybe say the Chargers averaged during the season. They don't need their defense to have 3 sacks each game or a turnover each game or anything like that. But they're great against the run. They're very efficient and they're very disciplined when it comes to flags. They hardly ever get a flag thrown against them. And they're devastating when it comes to their scheme and their blitzing and things like that. And what's so impressive about that is that they don't need to make these completely shut down, strapped plays where they go out there and continually prove that they're this dominant unit. Yeah, they give up points. Yeah, they give up some long plays and some impressive drives. But when the moment comes down to it and Steve Spagnuolo has to call a certain play, or this defense has to stop a 4th and 1, a tush push, or they got to stand strong in the red zone, or if they have to get a turnover, they always seem to be able to do that in the big moments. And I think that's a huge credit to Spagnuolo, and the defense that he calls, but also everybody understanding that their role, their mission isn't to just be shut down. Again, it's just to win. So if the goal is just to win, you got to make the big plays. And they're synonymous with making big plays, right? Calling the perfect blitz, right? And throwing everything off. That's exactly what this team is. So it is some of the things that I've kind of pointed out in this segment as to why they're back here in the Super Bowl and why we continue to talk about them. But what's so tragic for a lot of teams is that this has been going on for so long, and Patrick is only like 29, 28 years old, and it's not like they're getting older, right? Other than Travis Kelce, I guess a little bit, but Xavier Worthy is only a rookie. Rashee Rice is only like in his 2nd or 3rd year. Trent McDuffie is another young player. Like this is going to go on for a little bit longer. It's not like it's coming to an end or anything like that with a three-peat, right? I don't even think it's crazy to start talking about 4 in a row, right? They got to win this one, obviously, but they're not going anywhere anytime soon. And it's a huge testament to them and how they continue to evolve and get better even when it looks like there's no room to. So that was something I felt like it was worth pointing out on today's show. But that will bring us to the end of today's episode of the Chip Shot Football Podcast. I I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's show, and also I want to remind you guys to like, follow, and subscribe to the podcast as well, and follow the network on all forms of social media. And if you want to see more content around the NFL and this show, check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel, where you can see more of me as your host, covering some more NFL topics, some more discussions, breaking news, reviews, and previews, all leading up to the Super Bowl, obviously, which we will be covering. So until next time, join me again tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I hope you guys all have a good night, and I'll see you guys hopefully back here again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.